Okay, so imagine this. We're catching up with a friend, and they mention their loved one is, like, acting totally different after
Yeah.
a brain injury. And we're not just talking about, the
Right.
expected physical stuff, but, like, a real
Yeah.
shift in their personality. It's
Yeah,
like they're not the same
right.
person anymore. And that's what today's deep dive is really all about. Like, how traumatic brain injury can have these hidden consequences that we don't always talk about.
Yeah. And it's such a crucial area to understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a TBI, it can really just throw all these really intricate systems in the brain
Totally.
off balance. And, we forget the brain isn't just about, physical actions, moving your arm or
Right.
walking. It's the command center for our emotions, our thoughts, how we
Yeah.
interact with the world.
Totally. And when that command center is damaged, it's like no surprise that we see these
That's right.
really dramatic shifts in emotions and behavior.
Huge.
Right. And so that's where I feel like this whole idea of emotional dysregulation comes in.
Yes.
I have to admit, before, prepping for this deep dive, that term felt a little
Sure.
technical to me. Can you break that down for me? And for our listener, of course.
Absolutely. So, imagine the brain's ability to regulate emotions is kind of like, a volume knob.
Okay.
And after a TBI, it's like that knob is either stuck on high or it's just spinning erratically.
Right.
Wow.
So a minor disagreement, which, you and I might just kind of brush off,
Totally.
could suddenly escalate into this explosive outburst of anger.
Just totally out of proportion to what's happening.
Completely.
Yeah.
And the thing is, later on, they might feel so remorseful, even confused,
Right.
because they're like, why did I just react that way? They don't understand the intensity of their own reaction.
So frustrating, I bet, for everyone involved.
Incredibly. And it's not just about anger, right? We also see this increased irritability, really, really short fuse.
Like a hair trigger temper.
Exactly. Even things like impulsivity, poor judgment, making decisions they wouldn't normally make. A lot of that can stem from this dysregulation.
So it's almost like their brain's ability to hit the pause button, to think
Yes.
before they react. It's compromised in some way.
Exactly. And in fact, the medical excerpts we're looking at, they use this term, disinhibition, which is basically, a fancy way of saying that the brain's social filters, the ones that kind of help us behave appropriately in social situations,
Yeah.
those are weakened.
Which would explain, like, maybe someone who's now
Yes.
blurting out inappropriate comments
I
or
should-
like making risky decisions
Absolutely.
that they never would have considered before the injury.
Exactly. And you can imagine, right, this can have huge consequences for their relationships, their work life, really every aspect of their life.
Yeah.
And this emotional instability, it can actually manifest in even deeper ways,
Okay.
sometimes leading to very noticeable personality shifts.
Okay, see, now this is where it gets really interesting to me and a little unnerving, if I'm being honest. Like, we've talked about emotional changes,
Mm-hmm.
but this idea that a brain injury can fundamentally alter someone's
Yeah.
core personality traits,
Yeah.
that just feels almost impossible to really grasp. It really does make you wonder, right? Like, if our personalities can change so drastically after an injury,
Right.
what does that even say about, like,
Yeah.
the nature of the self, It's kind
Yeah.
of a big question.
It is a huge question.
And the research we're looking at today, it does not shy away from that.
No, it does not.
Hmm.
And one of the most challenging aspects of this is that these personality changes, they could be so unpredictable.
Really?
Someone who was once like the life of the party,
Yeah.
super outgoing, super social, they might become withdrawn and isolated after a TBI.
Yeah.
Or on the flip side, someone who was once reserved could become, overly talkative, impulsive even.
It's wild. So it's almost like their personality is like the software,
Yeah.
and then the brain injury is like this glitch in the system
Yeah.
that's just like fundamentally changing how it operates.
Yeah.
And I cannot even begin to imagine what that's like for loved ones.
Oh, it's incredibly
have to
difficult.
deal with. Yeah.
Absolutely. Imagine, feeling like you're interacting with a completely different person,
Right.
even though they look the same.
Yeah.
And so there's this ambiguous loss, right? Where you're grieving the person you knew.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. It's really heavy. And it just makes it even more vital to understand, these invisible ways that TBI can impact someone.
Yeah.
Because these changes, they don't just affect their inner world,
Yeah.
right? It leads to some very real
Right.
social and cognitive challenges.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned earlier this whole idea of the brain's social filter being compromised.
Yeah, that really
Yeah.
struck me when I was reading that.
So, so paint a picture for me. Like, what does that look like in everyday life?
Well, I'm imagining,
Yeah.
like you're at a dinner party or something, and your friend who, used to be really good at reading the room, they're telling a story, but they're just totally missing these cues that it's,
Where they've gone on too long.
yeah, too long, or it's not appropriate, and people are uncomfortable.
And they're missing those cues.
They're oblivious.
Exactly. So we're talking about difficulties picking up on social cues,
Yeah.
understanding humor, sarcasm, even maintaining like a good conversational flow.
Right.
Like imagine, someone who's constantly interrupting,
Yeah.
missing jokes, or maybe they're oversharing personal details
At the worst time.
at totally inappropriate times. It's like their social intuition is just, it's out of sync with everyone else's.
Totally out of sync. And I imagine that can lead to some
Yeah, it can be.
kind of awkward or even hurtful interactions.
Absolutely. And it can really lead to increased isolation, which they might already be feeling on top of everything else.
Yeah.
The research also mentions this term perseveration, which basically means like getting stuck on a thought or an action.
Okay, so what's a real world example of that?
So imagine you're having a conversation with someone
Yeah.
and they just keep bringing up the same topic,
Oh, over and over.
even though like you've clearly moved on.
Right.
Or think about the frustration of struggling with what's called task initiation. Even if it's something simple, like making a phone call that's really important to them,
Yeah.
they struggle to even get started.
Like their internal get up and go signal is just...
Yes. It's like it's on the fritz, right?
Yeah.
And so you can imagine
Totally.
these cognitive challenges on top of the social difficulties, it can just make everyday life
So hard.
so difficult. So friends and family, they might not understand why their loved one is acting so differently.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the person living with a TBI, they might withdraw because they feel misunderstood or embarrassed.
Right.
And so it creates this really difficult cycle. And I think that's why having the right information,
Totally.
the right understanding is so crucial.
Yeah.
Because knowing that these challenges are a direct result of the injury and not, a choice that they're making
Right.
can make all the difference
Huge difference, yeah.
in how we respond to them.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
Like the emotional changes, the personality shifts, the social struggles, the cognitive stuff.
Right.
It all goes back
It all
at
gets
that
back.
brain injury.
It absolutely does.
And in some way, it's wild.
It is. And because these challenges are so often invisible,
Right.
they can be, really easily misunderstood or even dismissed.
Totally. And I think that's why, it's so important for us to really talk about the impact
Yeah,
that TBI can have on mental health.
Absolutely.
We've been discussing this
Yeah.
emotional roller coaster and the personality changes and the social hurdles and, the cognitive fog.
Right.
That's
It's a lot.
a lot for anyone to have to deal with.
It is. And unfortunately, it's not at all uncommon for TBI survivors to experience,
Yeah.
anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
really intense mood swings.
Yeah. And we're not just talking about oh, you're having a bad day.
Right.
Like this is
This is
the
serious.
serious stuff.
These are serious mood disorders that often require professional help.
And this is where I would imagine having that support network, whether it's family or friends or therapists or some combination of all of that,
Yes.
becomes absolutely crucial, right?
Yeah.
Not just to help them, I guess, navigate the practical challenges,
Right.
but to really be there emotionally too.
You have to hold that space for them.
Totally.
To understand, to be patient. Because it's a journey, right? Recovering from a TBI.
Oh, for sure.
It's not just about healing physically. It's about adapting to a new way of being in the world.
It's like rediscovering who you are
Right.
in a way.
Yeah. And that takes time, it takes patience, and it takes understanding.
I love that. Okay, so as we're kind of starting to wrap up this deep dive here,
Yeah.
is there one key takeaway that you really hope our listener walks away with? What's the most important thing for us to remember here?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that traumatic brain injury is far more than just a physical injury.
Right.
It's an injury that ripples out and impacts a person's emotions, their personality, their relationships,
Yeah.
even their sense of self.
Their very sense of self.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's profound.
It really is. And I think that understanding, that awareness that you're talking about, that's like the first step towards
Oh, yeah.
offering compassion and support.
It's 100%.
Because sometimes the most, I guess, significant injuries, or the ones that have the biggest impact,
Yeah,
are the ones that we can't see.
100%.
This has been an incredibly, eye-opening deep dive for me, I have to say.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today and with our listeners.
Happy to be here.
Always a pleasure.